When we think of the greatest stories ever told, stories that shape the moral imagination of an entire civilization, we expect them to begin in grandeur. We imagine coronations, conch shells, royal courts, or the thunder of armies assembling for war. We expect spectacle. We expect glory. But the Ramayana, one of humanity's most revered epics, does not begin in triumph. It does not begin in celebration, or even in imagination. It begins in pain, sudden, raw, and piercing. And that is the first surprise. This epic, which millions turn to as a guide for righteous living, has its origin not in power, but in heartbreak. Before we understand how that came to be, we must first understand what the Ramayana claims to be. It is not merely mythology, at least not in its own tradition. It is classified as Itihasa, Itihāsa, meaning, so indeed it happened. It presents itself as sacred history, a spiritual record of events meant to illuminate the path of human life. And the one who recorded it is remembered as the Ādi Kavi, the first poet of humanity. But the man who became that poet was not born a sage. Before he was Valmiki, he was Ratnakara, a highway robber who lived in the forest. He was not misunderstood or symbolic. He was violent. He robbed travelers, hunted mercilessly, and killed without hesitation. The forest knew him as a terror. Yet, like many who walked the path of wrongdoing, Ratnakara did not see himself as evil. He had a justification, one that felt unshakable. He had parents to support, a wife to provide for, children to feed. In his mind, he bore the burden of sin so his family could survive. He believed he was sacrificing his own moral purity for their well-being. Survival, he felt, outweighed morality. Then came the turning point, not in the form of punishment, but in the form of a question. The celestial sage Narada happened to walk through that forest. Ratnakara attacked him, as he would any traveler, weapon drawn, confident in his dominance. But Narada did not react with fear. He did not plead or resist. He simply stood there, calm, almost compassionate. Instead of condemning the robber, he asked him something devastatingly simple. "You commit these acts for your family. Will they share the consequences of your karma?" The question seemed absurd to Ratnakara. Of course they would. They were family. Certain of his righteousness, he returned home to confirm it. But one by one, his illusion shattered. His wife told him calmly that it was his duty to provide, but how he chose to do so was his responsibility alone. His parents said the same. They would accept the comfort his actions brought, but not the karmic consequences attached to them. In that moment, Ratnakara's identity collapsed. The story he had told himself, that he was a noble provider, dissolved into terrifying clarity. He realized a truth that few dare to confront. In the end, every human being stands alone before the weight of their actions. The man who returned to Narada was not the same man who had attacked him. His arrogance had dissolved into desperation. He fell at the sage's feet and begged for redemption. Seeing that his transformation was genuine, Narada gave him a mantra to chant, Rama. But Ratnakara found that he could not utter it. His consciousness, heavy with violence and darkness, could not produce a word of pure light. So Narada offered a subtle alternative. "Then chant Mara," he said, a word familiar to a hunter. As Ratnakara repeated, Mara, 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 the syllables gradually inverted themselves into Rama. Through the word associated with death, he unknowingly invoked the divine. He sat in meditation for years, so long in fact that termites built an anthill around his unmoving body. Nature itself seemed to bury his former identity. When he finally emerged, it was as if he had been reborn. From the Valmika, the anthill, He became Valmiki, the sage born from stillness and transformation. Yet even then, he was not yet the poet. Wisdom alone does not create epic literature. Something deeper must stir the heart. Years later, walking by the serene waters of the Itihāsa River, described in the text as clear as the mind of a virtuous man, Valmiki witnessed a pair of birds in love. They were absorbed in their moment of innocence. Suddenly, a hunter's arrow pierced the air. The male bird fell dead. The female circled above him, crying in grief that was unbearable to hear. A detached sage might have observed the event as part of the natural cycle of life and death. But Valmiki did not detach. He felt. The sorrow of that bird entered him like a blade. Anger and grief surged together, and he cried out in protest. But what emerged from his lips was not ordinary speech. It came in perfect rhythm, structured, measured, musical. From his shoka, his sorrow, arose the first shloka, the most poetic verse in human history. The tradition beautifully preserves this insight. Poetry was born from grief. Art emerged from compassion. As Valmiki stood in wonder at what had happened, Lord Brahma appeared before him. He revealed that this was no accident. The goddess of speech had spoken through him. He was now to use this newfound meter to compose the story of Rama, and he was instructed to write it exactly as it occurred, without invention or exaggeration. Valmiki was not to be a fantasist, but a witness, a recorder of spiritual history. Before beginning, however, he asked one final question. Could such a perfect human being truly exist? A man who was strong yet compassionate, fearless yet gentle, firm in duty yet capable of forgiveness? Could all virtues coexist within a single human life without contradiction? Narada assured him that such a being did exist. Rama of the Ikshvaku dynasty, the Maryada Purushottama, the ideal man within limits. That distinction is crucial. Rama is not portrayed as a being who escapes suffering through divine intervention. He feels pain, endures exile, faces betrayal, and experiences loss. His greatness lies not in supernatural shortcuts, but in his unwavering commitment to Dharma within human boundaries. His divinity is revealed through his humanity. Thus, the Ramayana was born, a story of infinite compassion told by a man who himself had been reborn through compassion. The robber who once justified violence for the sake of family became the poet whose heart broke for a single bird. Ratnakara had to die for Valmiki to be born, and Valmiki had to grieve for the Ramayana to come into existence. The epic does not begin with power. It begins with sensitivity. It reminds us that karma cannot be outsourced, that justification does not erase consequence, and that true creation arises not from indifference, but from a heart capable of being moved. If the first poem in human history was born from a wound, perhaps the deepest wisdom always emerges from struggle. The Ramayana did not begin with a kingdom. It began with a cry, and with someone who was willing to hear it.
Project Sanatana, a trusted space for spiritual knowledge, authentic spiritual products and guidance, rooted in Sanatana Dharma. At Project Sanatana, we study ancient scriptures to bring you authentic spiritual solutions, rooted in tradition, not assumptions. We offer authentic Nepali Rudraksha, carefully selected, tested, and guided according to traditional Shastra principles. Rudraksha combinations crafted for specific life intentions, health, stability, focus, protection, and growth. We also guide Rudraksha selection based on your Rashi, Nakshatra, planetary energies, and Ishta Devata, following authentic Vedic alignment, along with sacred puja idols, Sphatika and green jade Shiva Lingams. created for daily worship and spiritual balance. This is not commerce. This is conscious guidance, offered with responsibility and devotion. Visit ProjectSanatana.com today and explore our spiritual products.